So, good morning to all of you. Since I made all the first year and all the freshmen go through this, I'm going to make all of you third year, second year, and final year student go through this kind of thing as well. Alright, change the camera. So this is TNE318 lecture 4. Today we're going to revise about group policy, how to create and manage group policy, and some kind of like more advanced group policy stuff. So before slowing things down and make things even more cringy, let's get into it. Alright, lecture 4. This is the 4th week of the semester. We've been together for like a month already. Happy anniversary. Okay, that sounds so weird. Okay, so let's start. So what have you learned about group policy in TNE 10005 in network administration unit? Do you still remember what we have learned back then? What is group policy used for? What the settings over there that you can change and everything, okay? First thing first, you have your local security policy, which is your Secpol.msc. It is for a non-domain member computer. Basically, computer that are not inside the domain that you can change the policy using the Secpol.msc. For computer that inside a domain, or usually like the one that's inside the enterprise organization thing, we use group policy that used to set things such as security restriction inside a domain, which commonly used in the enterprise organization. So place like our university, Swinburne, uses group policy also to control what other employees and what the other student can do or cannot do inside the computer. You already experienced this firsthand, as the Hyper-V cannot be used with a normal student account. So that's why we are given different type of account to use the Hyper-V in the computer lab. Alright, there's different type of restriction over here. We have security restriction, which allow or disallow to run a program, show or hide certain Windows tool, and then we have desktop standardization, which is like, for example, we configure setting for Internet Explorers, and then like folder restriction, and what browsers is it, like the default browsers to open link, and so on. GPO, or group policy object, it's like policies that are enforced and cannot be changed by the normal users at least, okay? So it contains group policy settings, and then this GPO have two components, which is group policy container and group policy template. Right? Group policy container is basically the place where you put your policy in, which is stored in the ADDS, which is your domain, like active domain directory system thing. And group policy template, GPT, is a file system folder that includes the policy data specified by the .adm file, security settings, script files, and information about application that are available for installation. For this one, it stores in ADDS. For this one, it stores in the sysvol folder, which is the default location, and will not replicate if not in the default location, and it contains the GP setting. While this one automatically replicated to the domain controller in the domain, the other domain controller in the domain, and then points to the GPT for the settings. So inside the GPO configuration settings, we have two things over here. Settings are to be applied to the computer regardless of which users logs in. Else called the computer account configuration is over here. It's called the computer configuration. All right. Basically, if you have a domain, or let me just draw something, and you have a domain, right? You have a computer over here. All right, you have users also, users and a computer. So you apply this GPO, right? GPO, you link it to this domain, for example. Okay, in this GPO, if you change the computer configuration, it will affect the computer inside that domain. And if you change your user configuration, it will affect the users inside that domain. All right. So the user configuration are settings that are to be applied to the users regardless which computer is used by the user. So example, this user is applied that GPO just now, and then when he tried to use in like different like organization unit, that setting will still apply to that user, since that user is inside that domain which that GPO is applied to him or her. All right. So in the GPO setting things, most of the policy contains like 3 type of state, which is the not configured, which is the default setting, if you don't disturb or anything. And then we have enable and disable. If we have double negative, it means like allowed to access. For example, if you prevent something like access to registry tool, if you prevent, and if you have this setting, all right, if you have setting called prevent access to the registry tools, and then you put disable to it, meaning that you can access the registry tools. All right, so basically, do you want to prevent access to registry tool? Disable that or enable that. All right, if you enable prevent access, means that it will prevent you from accessing the registry tool. It's more about the wordings of the GPO settings. So when we created a domain, we have 2 default GPO, which is default domain policy, which are linked to the domain itself, and also a default domain controller policy, which are linked to the domain controller policy. For the default domain policy is applied to all the domain users and the non-domain controller computer and users, and then it has default security setting and default power setting. While inside the default domain controller policy, for the domain controller, which applied to the domain controllers only, and it applies default user right. All right. You need to remember there's like a different thing over here. There's like 2 lists, kind of like a domain policy thing. All right. The link on the top, this thing is just like a shortcut file, as the icon have this kind of arrow. You see, wait, let me show you this arrow thing. All right, the arrow thing over there to tell which GPO is linked or applied in the domain. So basically, these are the links only, while the actual GPO, the list of the GPO that you have inside this folder over here, right? So this one is referring to the thing inside over here. So if you want to change some setting, you don't change it over here, but you change it inside here, and then like based on the naming that your that the link give to you. Okay. And then we have like GP link to a container, and then like which is the scope of it. All right, we can define scope of a GPO by linking it to specific site, domain, or organizational unit, aka OU. When we link a GPO to a site, domain, or OU, by default it will be applied to all objects within that scope. All right, unless it is restricted by applying block inheritance at a lower level. All right, basically, if you link a GPO over here at the domain level, okay, the scope of that GPO is the whole thing. All right, if you link it at the site, it is applied to the stuff inside the site. If you link it inside the OU, the scope of the GPO is inside the OU, unless you apply something called block inheritance. All right. For example, if you link a GPO saying that IT department cannot change wallpaper, all right, IT department cannot change wallpaper, but apply block inheritance to the desktop OU under the IT OU, all right, you apply blocks inheritance over here. The desktop OU members can change wallpaper, because if you apply block inheritance over here at the desktop OU, any other GPO outside of the desktop organizational unit will not affect the desktop OU. Okay? Unless the block inheritance is not actually very effective against the GPO link with enforced option tick. Okay, just now, if you have the GPO saying that you cannot change wallpaper, and then you enforce this, all right? Enforce the change wallpaper GPO. So if you have block inheritance at the desktop OU, the block inheritance will not affect that basically that the GPO. So that GPO will apply to the desktop OU. So the desktop OU just now, right over here, if you apply the change wallpaper, so the desktop OU also cannot change the wallpaper because the enforce will override the block inheritance. By default, if you're a member of an authenticated user group, you have access to group policy objects. The authenticated user group has read and apply group policy permission on group policy objects. If the authenticated user group is removed from the ACL on the group policy object, then you don't have read and apply permission for the group policy object. So this authenticated user, basically you can use security filtering with customized group, right? You can remove the default authenticated user from the GPO application list and then add customized global group. So the group that inside the security filtering will get the GPO applied to them. So if you want it to be more specific, you can put something like the IT group over here or something, and then delete this one. So only the IT group get affected by that GPO. Alright, but then we can also do something like to exclude certain group to be applied the GPO previously. You can set the apply group policy as deny over here. In this example, the IT global group will be able to use the run function as shown over here. Alright, we have removed run in the IT place. Okay, so if we have the remove run, the IT people, the IT users, any users inside the IT organizational unit will not be able to use the run function in Microsoft Windows accessories thing, okay? Unless you put this apply group policy setting as deny. So the IT group, people inside IT group can use the run function, okay? Now we are learning about the group policy application, precedence, and inheritance. By default, the order of application is the local policy, then the site, then the domain, then the parent OU, then the child OU. Basically, you can think of it this way. The more specific the OU is, the more specific the list go on is, the stronger it is. So over here, the child OU is the strongest among them. All right, okay, example, in local policy you say you cannot change wallpaper, but at the site level you can say, oh, all people in this site can change wallpaper. So now all of the rest over here can change wallpaper even though the local policy say no. But domain, at domain level, suddenly says, like, the domain says you cannot change wallpaper. So the members of the parent OUs, the domain people, and the child OUs all cannot change wallpaper after that. Okay? And then suddenly the parent OU say, oh, you can change wallpaper. Okay? So basically it's like this. People inside domain cannot change wallpaper, but the people inside the parent OU can change wallpaper, and people inside the child OU can change wallpaper. But what if the child OU say you cannot change wallpaper, and then any member inside the child OU cannot change wallpaper? So what if we have two type of GPO that going against each other? One GPO says can change wallpaper, and one say you cannot change wallpaper. So the GPO that you applied the latest, so maybe you change the wallpaper, you say you cannot change wallpaper today, tomorrow you say you can change wallpaper, but you haven't deleted the GPO yesterday. So the latest GPO that you apply, which is the can change wallpaper, take place. So that the latest GPO wins. Okay, so that's the inheritance part just now, right? GPO applied to an OU are inherited to its child OU. Okay, that's called inheritance. So example, if you apply the can change wallpaper to the parent OU, let me see, okay, this is OU, all right, And then under this OU, there's more OU. All right, this is called the child OU. Okay, so if you apply here, say you can change wallpaper, and it automatically inherit by the child OU. So the child OU also can change wallpaper unless you have the block inheritance, which means the child OU will not be affected by the GPO of the parent OU. So the GPO link without the enforce is what I said just now. All right, is over here. The latest one will win. Okay, what if the GPO link have the enforce option? Okay, let me actually the example is too complicated. I'm gonna just draw it over here. Okay, so you have domain over here. This is a domain. All right, domain, and then got OU, and then two childs OU. And then you have GPO1, GPO2, GPO3, and GPO4. Okay, by default, if you say this, the GPO1 say cannot change wallpaper, but GPO2 can say can change wallpaper, then over here can change wallpaper. Okay, that's like the default order of application without the enforce option tick. Okay, so this one also, if you say cannot change wallpaper, then over here cannot change wallpaper. And then if this one didn't have any setting, this one can change wallpaper if the GPO don't mention about the wallpaper changes. So if this one GPO2 is enforced, all right, is enforced, say that you cannot, you can change wallpaper. Even though this GPO inside this child say cannot change wallpaper, that will override it because it is a before. It's like the parent of the OU says, I'm enforcing you to be able to change wallpaper, even though you say you don't want to change wallpaper. So the parent say, the child was like have to follow the parent OU about it. How about the big boss? All right, so this one is GPO, this one enforce. The big boss also enforce the GPO. Enforce the GPO cannot change wallpaper. So the parent OU need to listen to their big boss that they cannot change wallpaper, and the rest of this cannot change wallpaper even though they have the block inheritance turned on. They all cannot change the wallpaper, and the biggest over here like will be the one that's like control all of the GPO if it's enforced. All right, but if it's not enforced, then the child OU and the parent OU can have their own GPO and so on. So over here, right, you might see this link order later on when you apply your GPO. It says 1, 2, 3. You don't think of it like the 3 is the letters you apply. No, it's the opposite. You can think about it as like 1 is like the first thing that it prioritized, meaning it's the latest that you apply, while 3 is the GPO that you apply the earliest in this list. So the latest GPO is the list that say link order 1. Okay. This one is something that you can see, right? Which one is the weakest GPO? So over here, let's see. Okay, you need to remember just now I tell you that GPO that are not enforced, and then the GPO at the top level is the weakest, while the earliest that you apply is the weakest. So in this sense, it will be the GPO B over here is the weakest, and then GPO C, and then GPO D, and then GPO G, and then GPO. Oops, I didn't see this. The G and the hash is not there. Wait, no, the hash is not there. Is the GPO? Let me get my pen again. GPOK, yeah, after G. Oops. After the G, after the G over here is the GPOK, because this one is not part of this OU since it asks about this OU. So the next one is the GPO K. After G is GPO K, and then it enforced by the GPO J. So GPO J takes over the GPO K, so it's like stronger than the GPO K. But then the GPO before that is GPO F is stronger than GPO J because the GPO J is inside the child OU, while the parents say no, you need to use the GPO F. But then inside the parent of the OU just now is the GPO E, which is also enforced, and GPO A at the strongest point because over here is under this the domain thing. So it's like the GPO A takes the rule or whatsoever, like takes all the thing if the rules inside the GPO got conflict, so they will listen to GPO A in the end if there's any conflict. If there's not any conflict, it will merge based on the settings thing. Let me see how to write this. Let me delete all of this and then give you an application, an example. What do I mean by it depends on what you apply and what so on, okay? So example, the domain at domain level and at the OU 1.1.2 level, okay, that's like different type of GPO, okay? At the domain level, you says that you cannot change wallpaper, all right? But inside the OU 1.1.2 just now over here, it doesn't have any GPO that says change wallpaper or not. So the GPO is like at default, which is the not configured. So the OU at 1.1.2 have the cannot apply wallpaper GPO applied to it. So it's kind of merged. If you're not configured at the lower level, then you follow the above level. All right. If this one have configured the what's called the can change wallpaper, you enable the change wallpaper setting, then if this one is not enforced, the OU 1.1.2 can change the wallpaper. So remember, if you don't have the GPO configured, it will follow the previous applied settings. This one you can think by yourself. So what happened if you apply the GPO, the domain controller store, and make all available of all the configured GPO, and then the client computer is responsible for connecting to the domain controller to request and apply the necessary GPO. So they retrieve, download, and cache and process the GP settings. A service called Group Policy Clients connect and downloads the required GPO inside the computers, and then a series of components on the client, the computer just now, known as client-side extension, process the GPO settings. All right. The policy setting in the computer configuration node are automatically applied at system startup. So when you restart the system, it will apply the computer configuration, and every 90 to 120 minutes after that. Depends. This one is like the time is like randomized from 90 to 120 minutes. So policy setting at the user configuration node are automatically applied at logon. So when a user log on, the user configuration GPO applied to that users on when they are logging in, and every 90 to 120 minutes after that. So this is the most useful thing that you will need when you do your lab, which is the GP update force usually, alright? So I would recommend you to GP update force and then restart your computer, and then when it goes back on, you can also put the GP update force again to ensure that the latest GPO that you put inside the domain controller is applied to that computer, so you don't have to spend so much time thinking why my GPO not working. Other than that, there's also a bunch of like tools that you can use to troubleshoot your GPO application, which will be introduced to you all like again, revised to you again later on. You also have something called WMI filter, which filter the system based on the characteristic of the computer. such as the RAM, processor speed, disk capacity, and so on, IP addresses, operating system, blah, 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 blah. The example is you can create a GPO to deploy software update to the Windows 10 computers only. We need to create the WMI filter for this thing, right? So we say it's like every Windows 10 PC update, okay? If you're not Windows 10, you don't need to update, that kind of thing. So you can set your WMI filter by going to here and then filters the computer thing by adding some kind of like query over here. For example, this one have select query from Windows 32 operating system where the version is like 10 dot something something. Okay, so if they are 10 dot something something, then you update. If not, then you don't update, that kind of thing. Now we have loopback policy processing, and for example, you have this user over here. Okay, this is me. My GPO say I cannot change wallpaper, and then inside this different OU there's this computer, and then the GPO over here say can change wallpaper. Okay, maybe like that computer is for you to train what kind of like wallpaper nice for your computer. Okay, so this is like a training computer for you to change your wallpaper for some reason. Okay, by default behavior, the GPO application applies to the user configuration setting configured in the GPO linked to the user's location in ADDS. So if I log in inside this computer, I cannot change the wallpaper because my username is not listed in this GPO say I can change wallpaper. So I cannot change wallpaper because it will follow my GPO. So loopback processing enables you to change this default behavior. Instead of the desktop setting applying based on the user's OU, the settings that apply are determined by the location of the computer located in the ADDS. So we have two modes for this, which is merge and replace. Okay, so if we use something like replace, if I log in inside this computer, I can change the wallpaper because I follow the OU of this computer instead of my own. Okay, you can use that for something like training computer or like school computer to replace certain like restricted OU to more open OU for learning purposes and so on, right? Alright, again, in normal group processing, okay, the setting is divided into the two things, which is the computer configuration and user configuration GPO settings. Loopback processing changes the way these two parts of group policy are applied. That's why it is important to know that normal group policy is split into two just now. The first mode is the replace mode. Okay, when a user logs inside the computer without a specific user account attached to it, the user configuration on the user will not be applied when using the device. For example, just now, a computer lab is meant for training the employees, and employee user account will commonly have some kind of restriction configuration, such as they cannot install stuff inside the computer. But when they log into the training computer previously that I tell you, the GPO inside that computer will replace the restriction to allow them installing program into the training computer. While merging mode is the GPO list obtained for the computer at the computer startup appends to the GPO list obtained for the users when logging on. The setting in the user configuration in the computer GPOs have precedence if they conflict with settings in the user's GPO. So basically, the one inside the computer configuration, if the computer configuration say no, and then the user configuration say yes, then in the end it will become no. However, if there's nothing set inside the inside the computer configuration, nothing set over there, but there's something set inside the user account GPO, then the one from the user is applied because the one at the computer have nothing like didn't say anything about that. So this is merge instead of replace. All right. So merge is useful when you need to apply additional settings to users' typical configuration. For example, when users are logging on to a computers in a conference room, you might allow them to receive the user's typical configuration but replace the wallpaper with a standard bitmap to and disable the use of certain application or devices. Okay. For example, this one, which do you think it would apply. The kiosk workstation have the, what is it called again? The loopback processing thing, while the marketing department of here, the user, try to log in inside the kiosk workstation. We have these two user configuration over here. If this one have replaced, then this one will not apply at all. But if this one, the loopback processing is merged, then anything that like conflicting with this one wins. Okay, that's about it. And then you can change the loopback policy processing inside that setting over there under configuration, system, and group policy. Configure users, group policy, loopback processing mode, replace or merge. If you enable it, if it's not configured or disabled, then it will not use the group policy processing. Okay. There are strategies for slow links and disconnected system. Users who work from home or branch office that have connected by slow internet connection, you might need to configure GPO processing to account for those have slow links. Alright, there are two options. The slow link detection option. If a link between the client and the domain controller serving the GPOs is slower than the 5 kbps, and the configure group policy link detection setting is enabled, then the client processes GPO differently. Okay, so it doesn't process the policy setting that are disabled. And then we have different type of technique called catching. When a client detects a slow link, a catching is enabled. A cache version of the applicable GPOs are applied by the client side extension. Here we have the common GPO management task. We need to back up the GPO and then we restore the GPO and import that to different domain, that kind of thing. Alright, we can copy GPO and so on. You can use the option provided in the GPMC to manage the states of the GPO. After that, we can use something called the starter GPO. It's store administrative template setting on which the new GPO will be based on. You can export it in cap file. Alright, you have starter GPO. Export to the cap file after you do some tweaking over it, and then you can import two different GPMC which loaded the .cab file just now, right? So you can import it to different domain controller, you can import it to different devices and so on. You have GPO based software installation as well. With a GPO-based software deployment, you can deploy software to computers irrespective of who is using the computer, or to users irrespective of which computer they are using. So basically something like our school computer, we can assign, like, you know how we have same software throughout the lab and so on. So we can use this GPO software installation based GPO thing to install that software to every of the computer. We can use the assign function. Like, so the computer will install all that software if you assign the software to the domain. I mean the OU or like the lab over there just now. So every of the computer will install it without user intervention. If you use publish option instead, the user that log in inside the computer need to choose whether to install that published software or not inside their machine. For example, I suddenly want to install Counter-Strike to all the PC inside the lab, but I choose publish instead of assign, so the student can choose whether they want to play Counter-Strike and install it or not. If I put assign, then every of the computer will get installed with the Counter-Strike. Next, we have something called script. It's often very useful to be able to run script during log on or log off when the computer start up or shut down. So these are used to set the user's environment, to map network drive, or to install software updates and clearing temp folders. Something like script that are like user login, the file is over there. Alright, the map the network shared drive map to that user. Okay. User logout, anything inside that computer that the user disturbed just now get deleted. That's what script are used for as well. There's more system that can do that, but you can do that with script, even though it's slightly more complicated to do everything with script, but it is there for you to do. And then we have something called folder restriction. Folder restriction is a feature that allow folder to be located on the network server, but appears as if they are located on the local drive. Alright, you can redirect this folder from different file server to your computer using the folder redirection. It appears as a normal folder even though that folder is actually from the server file. We have two options for that, which is the basic or advanced folder redirection option. For the basic folder redirection, it redirects all users' folder to a common area, a single folder root. Each user has a unique folder beneath that root. So for example, this is for the domain, this folder, let me redraw that folder is for the swin.local IT people. Okay, so inside this root folder, there's more folder for each of the user inside this IT or U. For advanced folder redirection, it redirects group of users to common shared folder. Each user has unique folder beneath their respective common shared folder. That's a more advanced way to redirect your folder. And then in administrative template, you have something called ADML and ADMX. ADML is basically the file of your GPO that are support in other languages. For example, a global company can have the domain where administrators see the GPO interface in their own language. So basically, it's like this GPO is stored over here in different languages. So okay, maybe like I have an employee from Indonesia that need Indonesian language to change the GPO, and then like it will change all the ADML stuff inside my English version as well. So the ADML file is is pointed by the file called ADMX, which is an XML file with code for the GPO settings. The software developer can create for their software. For example, download and install ADMX for Office, Microsoft Office or Adobe products, and then it will basically this thing you can refer to it more if you want. As I mentioned earlier, we can use the GPO to configure logon script to prepare the user's desktop environment, such as the mapping the network drive for the user, connecting peripherals such as the printer and so on, the network printers, alright. However, maintaining scripts can be complex and time-consuming management task. It also requires a knowledge of scripting languages. So instead of using script, we use group policy preference that are used to deliver setting more typically made available through scripting, but without actually doing the scripting yourself. So the differences between GPO settings and the GP preference is GP policy settings, group policy settings strictly enforce policy settings by writing the settings to areas of the registry that standard user cannot modify. But the group policy preference are written to the normal location in the registry that the application or operating system features uses to store the setting instead of the something that your user cannot change, alright? So the GP settings is typically disable the user interface for settings that group policy is managing. And the GP preference do not cause the application operating system feature to disable the user interface for the settings they configure, alright? For the settings like refresh policy setting at regular interval, while the preference is refresh preference by using the same interval as group policy setting by default. So it's basically refresh the same part, but this one is more like a preference kind of thing instead of like strictly enforced settings. Okay, you can troubleshoot your GPO by using this. This is important for you to do your lab. You can use this thing over here, which is the GP result, which is a command line tool that can use by any PC in the domain to see what kind of like GPO resultant. And then you can use the GP result wizard thing, this thing. Okay, so you can see over here which GPO which is the winning GPO. So maybe this one is like the policy that to enable remove and add program, and then the winning GPO is the remove run, just in case if you have a lot of tons of GPO, you're not sure which one takes precedence, which one got inherited correctly, and so on that specific child or you can click on it and see the resultant GPO, the winning GPO by using this group policy result thing, so you can see which GPO is the one that won the war. So that's it for today's lecture. I hope you all catch up on your lab and then study hard, I guess. So that's about it. So see you all next time. Sorry for the cringe. Bye.